I'm Luca Giliberti, contributing writer for Gold Derby, and I'm excited to talk about the fourth and final season of Ozark with Emmy-nominated showrunner and executive producer Chris Mundy. So, Chris, this was a very unique season of the show in that it was the longest, with 14 episodes, and was split into two halves. How would you say the structure and the length of the season ultimately lent itself to the storytelling of this final chapter?
Well, we needed to think of it. We thought of it as two different seasons just because people were going to experience it that way. So like we just had to break it that way. Like we had to feel like episode 7 really came to some sort of end, like at least emotionally. And yet, like when you pace it, and then 8 needed to start up like the final real chapter, and then when you pasted them all together, they had to make coherent sense. It couldn't, especially because we were hoping they would run the way they did, which is pretty close together. So people didn't have to wait a really long time. So it was a little tricky in just that way. So, it's one season, but it's not, and it's 2 seasons, but it's not. With the last ending on Ruth and her in episode 7, and then her actions in 8 kind of kickstarting everything was kind of the hinge, like just to put it all on her.
That's a perfect segue to my second question, because I think the break between episode 7 and 8 were very effective, because 8, which is one of the 3 episodes you wrote this season, really breaks with the show's usual style and rhythm. So talk a bit about the decision to follow the heart-pounding intensity of episode 7 with almost this meditative deep dive into Ruth's psyche in episode 8.
It's funny that meditative is actually the exact word we used to talk about it.
Perfect.
We felt like we'd had we'd had enough goodwill that we could do it. And especially because we're going into the final episodes, and because Ruth is Ruth, and that's the kind of everyone's favorite character on this show, and you were deep in like her decision was going to kickstart everything. So we were hoping that we'd built up the goodwill to have a sort of like different model for us, also the whole thing kind of starts spinning in on the birds, on Marty and Wendy and Ruth, and to really just pull them out and put them in one dilemma just felt like the ticket. But and we wanted to do musically, we wanted to be in sort of one headspace, which for the viewer, but also for Ruth. So we wanted it almost to be like a weird trance.
And in this episode, there are also hallucinations and dream sequences and visions. And in those, you bring back the bobcats, which Ruth briefly sees in her side mirror, and which I found really interesting. What do they mean or symbolize in this context?
I think to me, they symbolize her uncles who she killed, and who are kind of out there in her subconscious for sure. She set him free after all that stuff happened, and I think it was just one of those things. It's like her past. Like, what does she want to have catch up to her or not? And are they really out there in the world? Or are they gone forever? We toyed with bringing those bobcats back at the end of season 2 in a sort of similar way, but we ended up not doing it. So it was nice to bring. When you're finishing up a show, it's kind of like every little thread that's out there in the world is something like that's you have in your pocket if you want to go back to it.
Yeah, I really loved seeing them back. I had to sort of go back to look again if I had seen correctly, but I really liked seeing them again.
Oh, I'm so glad.
Yeah, and I think I speak for many people when I say I was completely shocked that Ruth kills Javi straight away in this episode. I expected that storyline to sort of extend throughout most of the second half of the season. So why was it important to you to not drag this out and have it happen so early on in the second half?
Well, we've tended in general in our storytelling to try not to drag things out. It's been more important to us to like have something happen and then go after the emotional fallout of it. In general, it's just trying to in keeping with the DNA of the show. But I also just think because of the way we knew the story was going to go, it was one of those things where Ruth had a choice. We wanted her to be very choiceful, and if she didn't do it, it would have all been, the last 7 would have been about not making a choice, or like waiting on a choice, or thinking about a choice. And so we tend to usually kind of plant a stake in the ground and then go in that direction, and hopefully, if we do our job right, still end up being surprising a little bit. And so we wanted it to be like, of course she's going to kill Javi, and then you're surprised that she killed Javi, and then she killed Javi and bad things are going to happen, but you're still surprised and saddened if bad things happen. So it was trying to stay true to the show, actually.
Yeah, I was certainly shocked. I didn't think she would actually do it, even till the moment where he was walking down the hallway. I was really shocked that she did it right away. And, why did Wendy make that phone call to him? I know she reasons that the outcome was inevitable, but she must have known exactly what the ramifications would be for Ruth, and must have considered that she might be putting her own family in danger. So is the inevitability of that outcome really the only reason?
I actually think that is the primary reason, because I think Wendy and Ruth are so similar. And I think that's partly why they're like this. A lot of the time it's like they see each other clearly. Marty doesn't always see Wendy as clearly as he should for a spouse, and he doesn't always see Ruth as clearly as he should for kind of a surrogate father. But Wendy and Ruth see each other, and so I think there was a point where Wendy understood, like, okay. I also think she got goaded into, Ruth was about to start going into talking about Ben and talking about the lie. And it's like, shut up, I'm not going to hear, I'm not, like, it's kind of like Wendy doing this and putting in, like, I don't want to hear about Ben. I don't want to hear about what I did. So I think emotionally Ruth pushed her, but I also think Wendy realized, like, oh yeah, we're not leaving here until Javi comes. And then whether or not she kills him or not is up to her. But I think Wendy knew what was going to happen.
That's really interesting. And I think Ruth is well aware herself, right? I mean, she knows that she dictates her fate the moment she pulls that.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
Think so.
And I think that is noticeable or reflected when Camila confronts her in the series finale, which you also wrote. You've talked a lot about why you killed off Ruth. So I actually want to ask about the way she goes out and the final words she utters. How long did it take you to perfect the specifics, as in the dialogue and execution of that scene?
Pretty quick. I think that was the first draft, to be honest. But there was a lot of talk. It was really important that if that character was going to go, and I'm still heartbroken that character is gone, that she needed to go out as strongly and on her terms, like without fear, without tears, without begging, that it was as strong as possible. And so that moment is always hers. So the thinking of that took forever. The writing of that took about 5 minutes.
Wow. That's fascinating because, what I really liked, and you sort of touched on that already, is that there is a sense of nonchalance and a sense of strength, in that scene. And even when she says, "How did you find out?" I felt like the way Julia delivered it, Julia Garner, and just the way it was written, it was so, I think it was such a great way for that character to go out. And I think it becomes very understandable why it had to happen that way. And, from there, I would like to switch gears and focus on the birds and discuss the role of family and marriage, which I read really dictated the way you would break a season of Ozark. So in season 4, how is the family union able to recover from a state of near disintegration and be reborn, so to speak, by the end of the season?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I think the simple answer that sounds like a cheat is I think children want to be with their parents and they love their parents, even in, I wouldn't say the birds are abusive parents, but they're certainly terrible parents in whatever way. So but I think even within that, you want to belong to like your people, your tribe. But I also think, when Wendy gives the speech and basically saying, I'm not going to trap you inside this, and takes responsibility for all this stuff, I think that's sincere. I think going into that hospital is manipulative, but it's 100% manipulative. at the same time, I don't know that she would have ever left it if they didn't come and visit her. So in that way, it's true. So it's a strange thing where, and so I think, we tried to make everyone have choices in the end. Marty has a choice whether or not to stay with Wendy. The kids have a choice whether or not to stay in the family. Ruth has a choice whether or not to kill Javi and set all these things in motion. So we wanted the kids to be able to examine all their choices and think about what they wanted. And then in a strange way, in the same way, the family kind of was held together by this criminal act in the first season. Because we've always said, like, if it wasn't for money laundering, they would have gotten divorced. This family would have disintegrated. Maybe they should have.
Might have been better.
Yeah, for the world at large. But in the same way, they come together for finally, firmly through like this bad act of violence at the very end. So in the same way, it kind of comes full circle, and in a cynical way.
Absolutely. And how does that tie into the car crash in the finale and, the decision to flash forward to that car crash in the very first scene of the premiere, which is the other episode you wrote?
Yeah, there's a couple different things in that. There's one is there's just the reminder that anything, that the world is dangerous, and in any given moment, even in a good moment, that things can turn upside down. And how do you want to define it in terms of like your faith? Like, the priest says that was your last warning, and Wendy's like, no, that was an assurance. Yeah. So it really is about that. It's like, well, if the world's going to throw that at you anyway, why not be in this thing together? And in another way, there's in the flashback episode in our very first season, going back to like why they got in the cartel in the first place. There's a car crash in that where Wendy was pregnant, and there's a car crash and she loses the baby, and sort of falls into depression. And part of going to this thing in the first place, into the cartel, into the laundering, was to pull her out of that depression in some way. So bookending the two things in some way by it felt like it's one of those things that if you notice it, great, and if you don't, it still should make emotional sense.
Right, that's really interesting. And, before we move on, since you just mentioned Wendy, I do want to highlight her for a second. I could talk ages about the complexity and trajectory of this character, but there's no scene that shocked me more than her banging the side of her head against the window and letting the blood just run down her forehead in episode 12. I know you didn't write this episode, but how did this scene come to fruition, and what does it tell us about Wendy's emotional state heading into the final two episodes?
I mean, I think she's what it tells is she's beating herself up, but she's so desperately driven. But if she takes a moment to like reflect, she's going to hurt herself, basically. We also wanted to, there's a moment at the top of 10 where you see when Ben was killed. Yeah. There's a moment in that where he is upset and he bangs his head against the window as well. And so we wanted to mirror those two things in this weird way that like they're each beating themselves up for the same kind of things in a way, and almost touch on like they're not that far apart in terms of their emotionality.
That's very fascinating. I was very happy to see Ben again and see Tom Pelphrey in.
I was just glad to see Tom back.
Yeah, we all missed him so much as viewers as well. He really is. And then there is the final scene, which you have talked about at great length. But something you've said that really stood out to me is that you don't think there is a question mark at the end, and that you think you can absolutely take that scene or that ending literally. So could you elaborate a bit on that?
Yeah, I've actually been surprised just by like in my life the amount of people that have, I mean, it's not a ton, but there are definitely people saying like, so who got shot? To me, the gun is like very firmly on Mel. Like that's it. Jonah sort of has permission to do it, and it's a bit of a callback to season one where the guy Garcia who was going to shoot the family, and then Jonah pulls the trigger, but it's not loaded.
Mhm.
Yeah, to me, my reasoning for it being off screen is simpler than mystery. It's really, how long do you live in that aftermath? If you see that moment, how long do you live in that aftermath? Like what it changes the sort of your emotional relationship to it. If suddenly you're in the muck and the mire of it, and then how long do you stay? And do you stay 10 more minutes? Do you stay, so to me, it was like, okay, yeah, this is it. And now we're gone. And I wanted people to almost have a reaction like, wow, and then be like, and then think like, oh wait, why, wow, you know what I mean? But I think if you get into the blood and guts of it, that it takes that away. So to me, it's clear, but like I kind of like the fact that people have the question. If you can debate it, if people are debating the show, even if they're upset about something, and I know there's things to be upset about in the final, obviously I'm upset about them too, but if people can debate it, it's just hopefully because they cared about the show. So I'm cool with that.
I mean, ambiguity sometimes leads to discussion, and discussion is something that is very good for a show, and it just
Yeah,
shows.
no, I mean, it's a privilege to have anybody watch it at all. So like, let alone like, talking about it afterwards. So.
Yeah, exactly. And it's almost shocking that before this, Jonah had never really killed anyone, like you said. I mean, he had almost crossed the line several times, but he didn't for various reasons. We also had the season 3 finale where he, pointed the gun at Helen and everything.
Right.
So when did you know that he was going to be the one who calls the shots in the show's ultimate climax?
Pretty early, pretty early in the break of season 4. We didn't know that Ruth was going to die in the break. In fact, in the initial break, she probably was not going to. And in fact, it wasn't until we had 14 episodes instead of 10 that sort of started shifting.
Mhm.
As the story sort of evolved and we had more real estate, but pretty early on, knowing the thing, the Jonah thing stuck, and so you kind of like, it's like with a lot of things, you have the idea, and me or somebody else in the writer, one of the other writers, and you kind of live with it, and then suddenly, if it sticks around long enough, you feel like, okay, it must be. We all feel good about it, and that one just kept sticking around. So I would say, within the first few weeks of coming into the final season, I knew that, especially because we were using Jonah as kind of the measure of whether or not the family could stay together. Because he was the one at that point that was breaking with the family. Charlotte had, in earlier seasons, but she'd sort of come around, and Jonah had always been completely on board. So in season 4, the very end of 3, when Ben has died, and then for 4, the fact that he was out, it needed to be him that closed the circle, I think.
Mhm. I really like that explanation. I really think it makes perfect sense. And when I spoke to Cindy Malo, who edited the episode, of course, she said it just shows again how the birds get away with something again. And I thought, that's also a very interesting interpretation. On a final note, though, so you did 44 episodes of this show. You were able to see your vision through. What do you take from this entire experience on both a professional and on a personal level?
I think that, like, on a personal and professional level, both, it's kind of the same thing. It's if you're, these things, so many people are involved, and so many things have to go right for anything to ever be any good. Hopefully the writing has to be good, then the acting has to be good, the crew's got to be really great, your DP's got to be great, the directors have to be great, your editors have to be great, like and so I think this was a show, like, from the beginning, we all kind of felt like we owned it together. There's this kind of like church and state relationship between writing and production, or different places, and like we just never had it. We were just all us. And I think to me, the strength of the show comes from that. Like, you get a group of people that are talented, and you let them do their jobs, and something good is going to happen. And I feel like everybody, hopefully, that worked on the show felt like they could own their job, and then they made it better than it, had any right to be, basically.
Right. I mean, that's certainly the impression I got after watching that behind the scenes, video that Netflix posted. I believe it's like 30 minutes. And yeah, well, congratulations on 4 seasons of the show and this amazing final season. And thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us today. We really
Oh,
appreciate
it's my
it.
pleasure. Thanks for watching and being interested at all.
Of course.